Thank you. I just mentioned to Hunter is that I like to hunt myself, so he's going to have to come up and we'll go out in a goose blind and we'll do that. So, afternoon, everybody. It is my unique pleasure and privilege to have been a member of the group that worked on the innovative and historic undertaking that became known as the Grand Bargain. This effort led to a total of $616 million being committed to help expedite the resolution of the City of Detroit's bankruptcy and to save our city for the benefit of its residents and the residents of the region and all of Michigan. The vantage point from which I got to witness the amazing commitment and courage of those working on this resolution was from that as of the seat of a chair of the legal committee representing the foundation funders, and in my role as Vice President of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. As with all in life, my perspective would be probably different from that of others, but I would surmise that all involved are grateful for the dedication everyone brought to the table. I benefit personally in my role from the leadership of the legal committee's first chair, Ricardo A. Castro, who at the time was the General Counsel and Secretary of the Ford Foundation out of New York, and from the commitment, talents, and participation of the other members of that legal committee. I will always be grateful for their invaluable counsel, support, and trust, and to them I want to dedicate my comments here and share with them this recognition as a scholar in residence at the Center for Community Philanthropy at the Clinton School of Public Service at the University of Arkansas. So let's start with a brief description of Detroit. Detroit is a city of long and storied history. It sits on the banks of the Detroit River in the southeast part of Michigan. The city's name is taken from the French, La Detroit du Lac Erie, meaning the Strait of Lake Erie, which links Lake Huron and Lake Erie and also includes Lake St. Clair and the St. Clair River. The French originally settled Detroit in 1701. The Detroit River flows 24 nautical miles and ranges in width from 0.5 to 2.5 miles in width. It is only one of two places on the northern border of the United States where Canada is actually our southern neighbor. In the past, the Detroit River was polluted due to the waste of the industrial might of Detroit and the surrounding region. Restoration efforts have brought the river back to life. It is not unusual, as you can see in these pictures, to see a commercial freighter, multiple sail and motorboats, fishing boats, and jet skis plying the river's currents all at the same time on a sunny summer day. One of the pictures here is actually a carousel on our Detroit Riverfront walkway. In many ways, the Detroit River is a living metaphor to its namesake city. It is big, it is powerful, it has recovered from adversity, and it continues to evolve and relentlessly flow. Like its namesake, Detroit is big. It covers a surface area of over 139 square miles, and as you can see here from this overlay, San Francisco, Boston, and Manhattan would fit inside the footprint of Detroit with room to spare. Detroit is also powerful. It is a home of many outstanding anchor civic and educational institutions and countless smaller organizations. At the risk of offending those I do not mention, let me just list a few of the cultural organizations and businesses to illustrate this point. Detroit is the home to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the Michigan Opera Theater, the Detroit Institute of Arts, the Detroit Zoological Society, the Detroit Historical Society, the Charles Wright Museum of African American History, the Sphinx Organization, each highly renowned. Detroit is also the home to world-class colleges and universities, including Wayne State University, and extension offices of Michigan State University, Central Michigan University, and others, while the University of Michigan finds its home in neighboring Washtenaw County, a county within southeast Michigan. Members of the business community include well-known companies like General Motors, Rock Ventures, Kelly Services, Little Caesars, CompuWare, Ally Services, Shinola, and others, while Southeast Michigan is home to Ford Motor Company, Fiat Chrysler, and other automotive suppliers and companies in countless other industries. Its industrial might led it to be called the arsenal of democracy during World War II. Detroit is a home of 4 professional sports teams, the Tigers, the Lions, the Red Wings, the Pistons, who are returning to Detroit in 2018. Add to university, high school, travel athletics, and outdoor recreation, and Detroit becomes a sports mecca. Detroit, like the river, has also recovered from adversity more than once. It has suffered through recessions, wars, and civil unrest. Its residents are warm and welcoming, courageous and intelligent. They are my family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues, and they care passionately about their community. Unfortunately, there are far fewer of them than there were in the past. Per the U.S. Census, the population of the city of Detroit reached a peak in 1950 at 1.849 million people. By 2015, that population had declined to an estimated 677,000. Imagine any city in this country losing more than 60% of its population. Imagine the strain, the resulting loss in tax revenue, and the increases in the per capita cost of delivering public services such a population shift would cause. Whole papers can be done just studying the reasons behind that population loss and to the other factors that contribute to the city's fiscal crisis. I mention the population loss here only to illustrate that often in Detroit our challenges are big, sometimes big enough to challenge our strengths. The scale of what was required when we put together the grand bargain is what required us to put the grand in the bargain. The scale of the fiscal crisis was evidenced when Kevin Orr, the City of Detroit emergency manager appointed by Governor Rick Snyder, concluded that the city had unfunded liabilities of approximately $18.5 billion. By comparison, other municipal bankruptcies paled in comparison. The City of Detroit bankruptcy was nearly 6 times larger than the next largest municipal bankruptcy and nearly 3 times larger than the next 4 largest bankruptcies combined. Mr. Orr filed for bankruptcy protection of the City of Detroit on July 18, 2013. The case was assigned to U.S. District Judge Stephen Rhodes, who appointed U.S. District Judge Gerald Rosen as the chief mediator of the case. Besides the sheer scale of the amount the city owed, other factors complicated the bankruptcy. Approximately 60% of the debt was owed to the 2 underfunded City of Detroit pension systems, the City of Detroit General Retirement System, and the City of Detroit Police and Fire Retirement System, and to pensioner health care and related costs. The average annual pension of these pensioners was not princely. Only $19,000 for a retired non-uniform employee who could collect Social Security, and only $32,000 for a retired uniformed employee who could not collect Social Security. Initially, proposed cuts to the pension benefits could be reached possibly as high as 50% and would have left the income of many of the pensioners below the federal poverty line. And even if those cuts were attempted, lengthy challenges would have been litigated as the pensions were arguably protected from reduction by provision of the Michigan Constitution. Municipal bondholders and the insurers of those creditors were also owed significant amounts. Other factors that added complexity to the proceeding was a city-owned water system that serves the much of the region, which had been under federal oversight for decades. The combination of all of these factors complicated any quick resolution to the city's fiscal crisis. Most municipal bankruptcies are assetless, meaning that there are no assets that the city or municipality owns to sell to settle claims. Additionally, federal bankruptcy laws protect municipalities from being forced to sell assets to settle claims. Except Detroit's bankruptcy was not assetless. Unlike those other cities, Detroit owned its zoo and its art museum building and collection. While zoos are important educational cultural institutions, we found out that they're really difficult and costly to sell or shut down. Art, on the other hand, has a ready market for sale. This raised the possibility that the collection of the Detroit Institute of Arts, or at least a portion of it, would be sold to pay creditor claims. Many of the pieces of art had been donated to the museum, but others had actually been purchased during the heydays of the city with excess tax revenues made available that were available to make such purchases. The origin of the art collection raised other questions, such as whether the pieces bought with the tax revenue were available for sale only, or was all the art at risk if all was owned by a bankrupt city in desperate need of cash. The Michigan Attorney General opined that the entire collection, regardless of source, was held in public trust for the people of the state of Michigan and could not be sold, which brought further the question about the utility of an art sale. So as you can see, the sheer scale of and complexity of the myriad creditor claims, the unsettled questions of legal import, and the prospect of complex and lengthy litigation to resolve the matters made the likelihood of any quick resolution of the bankruptcy proceeding very unlikely. And with each passing day, the city's fiscal situation worsened, claims went unpaid, direct participation of elected officials in managing the city was suspended, and the services to the city residents did not improve. Any further protracted period of the bankruptcy and the related litigation costs involved would likely mean the city would never recover. So enter the grand bargain. Chief Mediator Judge Gerald Rosen ran into my president, Miriam Nolan, of the Community Foundation at the Gateway Deli one day during lunch. Our deli is located in our building, which is directly kitty corner from the Theodore Levin United States Courthouse in Detroit. Innocently, Ms. Nolan made an off-the-hand comment to Judge Rosen to the effect of, "Please let me know if we can ever be of assistance." So the next morning, the judge called and asked her to come over to his chambers as he had something to discuss with her. What he discussed with her was his request that she convene a group of foundations who would be willing to provide as much as $500 million to help resolve the city's bankruptcy. That afternoon, she and I put together a list of foundations to invite to meet with the mediators to hear their formal request for help. Interestingly, every invited foundation attended that November 5, 2013 meeting, and ultimately, every invited foundation made grants to assist in one way or another in the city's recovery. While the foundations did not quite get to $500 million ask of the judge, they did ultimately commit more than $366 million. Nearly $300 million of that commitment was made in grant intentions that were on the table by December 13th, just 5 weeks after the initial meeting, enabling the mediators to then approach the state of Michigan for matching support as well. It was this moment of happenstance in the Gateway Deli which led to the incredibly complex and historic process that would ultimately become known as the Grand Bargain. Legally known as the DIA settlement and initially referred to as the R Trust, the Grand Bargain would provide $816 million to the city of Detroit, payable over 20 years, to be used for the sole purpose by the city as contributions to the general retirement system and the police and fire retirement system. The source of this support being the $366 million from the foundations, the $350 million from the state of Michigan, and about $100 million from the DIA and its supporters. This entire undertaking was facilitated principally by the exceptional skills of federal mediators Judge Rosen and Eugene Dreicher, a long-serving and highly respected Detroit attorney. The foundations participating in the funding of the Grand Bargain are referred collectively to as the foundation funders. This is found in all the legal documents for the Grand Bargain. The foundations include, alphabetically, Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, $10 million, the William Davidson Foundation, $25 million, the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, $10 million, the Max M. and Marjorie S. Fisher Foundation, $2.5 million, the Ford Foundation, $125 million, the Hudson Weber Foundation, $10 million, the Kresge Foundation, $100 million, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, $40 million, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, $30 million, the McGregor Fund, $6 million, Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, $10 million, and the A. Paul and Carol C. Scott Foundation, $5 million. One who's good with numbers will quickly determine that the commitments enumerated just now total $373.5 million, not the $366 million from the foundation funders that is reported in connection with the Grand Bargain. The difference is the result that the Scott and Fisher Foundation's grant commitments were credited during the bankruptcy mediations toward the $100 million commitment from the DIA. but they like being referred to as foundation funders, and they are our foundation funder partners. All of the funding commitments, including those from the state of Michigan and the DRA, are eligible for a discount if paid earlier than over the 20-year period. In fact, the state of Michigan elected to pay its entire $350 million 20-year commitment on the day of the closing of the bankruptcy, resulting in it making a one-time payment of $194.8 million. In 2016, the DIA also elected to accelerate most of its financial obligations, other than those of the Scott and Fisher foundations, who continue to pay over the 20 years, in which the DIA is still obligated as a guarantor, by the DIA making its own discounted lump sum payment as well. The foundation funders continue to make payments using the 20-year term originally provided for in the agreements. In exchange for this significant monetary support, the City of Detroit agreed to several conditions and requirements. The three main requirements that were requested by the foundation funders were, first, that the city would use the provided funds solely for the purpose of supporting the two City of Detroit pension systems. Second, that the city would irrevocably transfer ownership and management of the city's art museum, named the Detroit Institute of Arts, or DIA, to the nonprofit Detroit Institute of Arts, the nonprofit organization that had been managing the museum on behalf of the city prior to and during the bankruptcy proceedings. Third, and often overlooked, was that the City of Detroit bankruptcy had to be completed, including any appeals, by December 31, 2014. As one might expect, there are countless additional details and requirements to a transaction as complex as the grand bargain. For the sake of brevity, I will only summarize a few additional ones here. The two required classes of the creditors had to each agree to the settlement of any changes to the two pension funds. I want to note that the foundation funders did not participate in any of the negotiations regarding the changes to the retiree benefits. The foundation funders took the position that to do so would be an improper overreach by the foundation funders into the role of government and its relationship with civic employees. The only requirements by the foundation funders with respect to the pensions was that the monies provided be used solely for the pension plans, that the pension changes be approved by the members of the two pension classes, and that future payments would be conditioned on the two pension systems being managed in a responsible manner. Next, the Detroit Institute of Arts had to remain in the City of Detroit and remain named the Detroit Institute of Arts, as there was no intent on part of the foundation funders to deprive the city residents of their prized art museum. Three counties, the counties of Wayne, wherein the City of Detroit and DIA are located, and adjoining Oakland and Macomb County, had to continue the collection of a recently adopted operating millage for the DIA through 2022 as originally passed. The operating revenue was important for the survival of the museum while it fulfilled its financial obligations to the grand bargain. This required each of those county governments agreeing to continue to collect the millage and to make payment to the nonprofit DIA and not the city, who would now own the museum and the collection. We asked that the state of Michigan agree to match the commitment of the foundation funders, and did so with a $350 million commitment. The state legislature and the office of the governor obtained other agreements in exchange for the package of legislation that approved the state's financial support for the grand bargain. These agreements, including the formation of an investment committee for each pension system that provides oversight of the pension boards, and they secured a commitment from the DIA to provide increased statewide services throughout Michigan. And lastly, I'll enumerate that the DIA was also had to contribute substantially and would do so at $100 million to the grand bargain. These requirements were intentionally designed to accomplish these things. One, to expedite the City of Detroit's exit from bankruptcy for the benefit of the residents of the City of Detroit and the residents of the region and Michigan by helping to honor the city's commitment to its retirees, thereby helping to relieve the burdens of government, and protecting the City Art Museum as a cultural and educational asset important to the city's revitalization. Much of the media coverage regarding the grand bargain centered around the saving of the art collection of the DIA. This was an important goal of the undertaking. However, I would personally suggest that protecting the retirees of the city by lessening the impact of the bankruptcy on their financial situation was of equal importance. Those of us that were directly involved recognize that the real heroes of the grand bargain and the city's exit from the bankruptcy are the retirees who voted to take benefit cuts necessary even with the financial resources provided through the grand bargain. 82% of the police and firefighter pensioners approved health care cuts and a reduction in their annual cost of living adjustments to their pension payments. 73% of the general pensioners voted in favor of a 4.5% monthly pension benefit reduction, elimination of all cost of living adjustments, and a return of previously paid annuity bonuses that were paid to them from the retirement system. The services of those retirees to the residents of the city, both during their employment and now in their retirement, should never go underappreciated. The foundation funders, myself included, get much of the praise for their financial contributions, but those contributions are only a result of the personal sacrifice of those retirees. While each foundation, government body, or donor, whether an individual or a business, had their individual reasons and motivations for participating, the one goal upon which we all agreed and was central to the grand bargain was the expedited conclusion of the bankruptcy proceeding. Again, any protracted bankruptcy proceeding would have only exacerbated the problems of the city was facing. That is why the requirement that the bankruptcy be completed by December 31, 2014 was so important. The payments under the grand bargain stretch over a 20-year period ending in 2034. As such, it was necessary to put in place a means by which to manage this undertaking and to centralize reporting and payment processes. The Community Foundation proposed the establishment of Foundation for Detroit's Future, or FDF as we like to call it, to the Foundation Funders Legal Committee for the purpose of managing this relationship over the next 20 years. That committee accepted that recommendation and promoted it to all of the leaders of the various foundation funders. FDF is what is known as a Type 1 supporting organization of the Community Foundation, meaning that the board of the Community Foundation appoints a majority, in this particular case 3 people, who are members of the board of FDF, and the other 2 board members, initially nominated by the other foundation funders, appoint their successors on that board. FDF provides status reports to the various foundation funders and collects grant payments from those foundations annually. FDF is the organization to which the City of Detroit reports on its compliance on ongoing conditions to receive future payments for the benefit of the pension plans. The Board of Directors of FDF determines whether the city is compliant with those annual ongoing grant conditions and authorizes grant payments to the city from FDF. The DIA also made its payments to FDF for subsequent remittance to the city, whereas the payment by the state of Michigan was made directly to the city. Some of the other responsibilities of FDF include consulting on the appointment of the independent members of the 2 pension investment committees, which were formed, as mentioned previously, by the state legislation authorizing the state's contribution of $350 million. Also, the Skillman Foundation makes payments separate from the grand bargain to FDF that are subsequently granted by FDF to the city to provide funding under a separate city grant agreement, it's actually its name, to support 4 retiree health care plans. The actual relationship between FDF, the city, and the DIA is memorialized in, and this is a nice short little name, the Omnibus Transaction Agreement by and among the City of Detroit, the Detroit Institute of Arts, and the Foundation for Detroit's Future, or the OTA. This 3-way agreement is an original legal document that, to the best of my knowledge, has never been prepared before the grand bargain. It is a document unlike any other, and at a mere 106 pages, encapsulates all the interactions between these 3 entities. All of the various documents and agreements were included in and approved as part of the 8th amended plan for the adjustment of the debts of the City of Detroit, commonly referred to as the Plan of Adjustment. This is the document that contains all elements of the settlement of the bankruptcy of the City of Detroit. It was filed on October 22, 2014, and measures, again, a mere 1,165 pages in length. U.S. Judge Stephen Rhodes, the presiding judge of the bankruptcy, issued an oral opinion approving the plan of adjustment on November 7, 2014, and on December 10, 2014, just shy of 17 months after the filing of the city bankruptcy and 3 weeks before the deadline for conclusion under the terms of the grand bargain, Emergency Manager Kevin Orr filed notice that the bankruptcy was over, and with that filing of that notice, FDF made the initial payments to the city under the grand bargain. The city transferred the assets of the City Art Museum to the nonprofit Detroit Institute of Arts, and a new future began for the city of Detroit and its residents. In his oral opinion approving the plan of adjustment, Judge Rhodes addressed the residents of Detroit by saying, "We have used the phrase the grand bargain to describe the group of agreements that will fix the city's pension problems. That description is entirely fitting. In our nation, we join together in the promise and in the ideal of a much grander bargain. It is the bargain by which we interact with each other and with our government, all for the common good. That grander bargain, enshrined in our Constitution, is democracy. It is now time to restore democracy to the people of the city of Detroit. I urge you to participate in it, and I hope you will soon realize its full potential." So, what are some of the innovations that arose out of the grand bargain? Well, first, the entire grand bargain transaction was in and of itself an innovation. Second, and kind of interesting, is that Fast Company listed the Foundation for Detroit's Future #1 on its list of World's Most Innovative Companies of 2015 in not-for-profit. First of all, I didn't even know they had a list. Okay. In giving us that award, they pointed out it was for saving a city and its art. Some philanthropists make big donations to find a cure for a disease or to help poor children overseas. But what if not-for-profits and some companies could save an entire city? #2 on that list that year, the ALS Association for its Ice Bucket Challenge. We did good. The Foundation for Detroit's Future is very innovative. I am unaware of any other nonprofit organization that exists to execute and manage a 20-year financial commitment to a city to facilitate that city's exit from bankruptcy, with the ongoing responsibility to monitor that city's compliance with payment obligations, and to report to and interact with 12 foundation funding partners in providing the underlying support for those payments to the city. It is also quite unlikely that any such situation will arise again in the future. The Omnibus Transaction Agreement, or OTA, is an innovation in foundation grant agreements. The number of matters it addresses within its pages makes it an extremely complex and interesting document, which could be a law class study by itself. These innovations and others were necessary because of the complexity and time pressures inherent to the bankruptcy of the city of Detroit. The situation demanded no less than original and innovative ideas to reach resolution. So, the grand bargain and whether or not it's actually community philanthropy that affects social change. We're here at the Clinton School of Public Service at the Center for Community Philanthropy discussing the elements of this historic undertaking, being both the largest municipal bankruptcy and likely the largest coordinated philanthropic response to a city's fiscal crisis to date and possibly ever. The mission of this center is to study and educate about community philanthropy, which, quote, connotes that giving is a common and natural component of communal life and civic engagement, and that it is a vital, though poorly understood, aspect of public service, end quote. Further, the center is here to discern the role that community philanthropy plays in bringing about social change being an alteration in the social order of a society. Social change may include changes in nature, social institutions, social behaviors, or social relations. I think it would be pretty hard to argue that the Grand Bargain did not make changes in the relations, behaviors, and institutions found in Detroit, the region, and the state between the philanthropic, governmental, and business sectors, or the relationship and interplay between those institutions and the citizens and residents of the city of Detroit, Southeast Michigan, and the state. As noted by Judge Rhodes, the result of the Grand Bargain was a return of the governance of the city of Detroit to its residents through their directly elected city government. Was it community philanthropy? I think to answer this, one must examine the connections of all those involved in this, and their commitment to the city and the region. Obviously, the residents of the city of Detroit and their government leaders were deeply connected to the community. Similarly, the residents of the counties and the state of Michigan and their elected leaders who supported the Grand Bargain are connected to the community of Detroit. The Detroit Institute of Arts and its supporters, patrons, and visitors are connected and tied to this place called Detroit. As to the foundation funders, there is a deep connection by each of them to the community of Detroit. The Ford Foundation, New York, New York, was born from the wealth of the Ford Motor Company, founded in Detroit. The James S. and John L. S. Knight Foundation from Miami, Florida, was founded by the owners of the Knight newspapers, which included the Detroit Free Press, and has always maintained a commitment to Detroit. Other national regional foundations like the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan, the Kresge Foundation in Troy, Michigan, and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation in Flint, Michigan, have had significant program and mission commitments to Detroit. And obviously the local foundations, Davidson, Erb, Fisher, Hudson Weber, McGregor, and Scott, were committed to Detroit. And then there is the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. Since 1984, it has been serving the residents of Southeast Michigan. The source of the Community Foundation's grant to the Grand Bargain came from its unrestricted endowment, and an endowment that had been built up over decades by thousands of gifts, large and small, from individuals, families, and businesses desiring to improve the quality of life in Southeast Michigan. Their collective community philanthropy, by gifting to that endowment, was what made possible the Community Foundation's support for and participation in the Grand Bargain. The resolution of the bankruptcy through the Grand Bargain was also supported by other businesses and individual community members. The Community Foundation established an online giving platform to receive individual gifts that were ultimately credited to the DIA's commitment. While those gifts totaled a relatively modest $65,389, they were evidence of the support of the broader community to the undertaking. Similarly, advisors to donor advised funds made grant recommendations to support the Grand Bargain. Businesses and other foundations like the Ford Motor Company Fund, the General Motors and the General Motors Foundation, and others provided support to the DIA and its funding obligation. In other words, community philanthropy of all shapes, sizes, were mobilized and supported the Grand Bargain. So what are the lessons learned? I've been asked on more than one occasion if the Grand Bargain is a model for philanthropic support to resolve the fiscal issues facing other governments, including several other instances of potential municipal or governmental bankruptcy. My answer would be no. The specific legal, asset, and financial facts about the bankruptcy were unique to Detroit. Most other cities will be assetless. Most cities do not have the scale and depth of the foundation community that are found in Detroit and committed to Detroit and Southeast Michigan. Therefore, it's very unlikely that these circumstances will arise in another community that would allow the Grand Bargain to be used as a model. What can be gleaned from the Grand Bargain are lessons that can be used to address not only governmental fiscal crises, but pressing issues necessitating social change. I offer here a few of the things that I believe mattered in reaching conclusion of the Grand Bargain that are important as other philanthropies try to collectively address the challenges we face in the communities we serve. Identity to physical space matters. The Grand Bargain was about saving a city, protecting the pensioners of that city, preserving the cultural institution of that city, and benefiting the residents of that city and state. Place was central to the purpose of the undertaking and is a way in which all of the foundation funders could find a common goal consistent with their individual missions. Some have attempted to define community around shared interests or other identifiers, such as interest in the arts or environment or religion or ethnicity. and others look to political party affiliations or ideals as community, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans. There is nothing wrong with identifying with a variety of communities. However, I would suggest that our geographical identity is a very important one. It is what defines our home, and it is an identity that cuts across all other identities. Place matters. Philanthropy. All of the foundation funders that participate in the grand bargain are endowments, which provided many advantages to the entire process. First, as permanent philanthropic residents of the community of Detroit, each foundation funder had a vested interest in the city's survival, both currently and in the future. Second, the investment of those endowments of the foundation funders provided the financial capital to participate at the level that the grand bargain required. And lastly, each foundation funder was able to provide staff expertise because of the longevity of those foundations, where they had nurtured professionals with decades of experience in forging complex partnerships and who had the ability to address the varied legal, accounting, and tax aspects involved. As noted earlier, donor advisors recommended grants to support the grand bargain. What was not mentioned is that without one particular donor advisor, the operation and existence of the Foundation of Future may not have ever been possible. The operation of the Foundation for Detroit's Future is funded by two primary sources. First, on any of the earnings on some accelerated payments to FDF that are paid by the Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation is actually paying its commitment over 15 years, not 20, and allowing FDF to capture the investment earnings on those grant reserves for operations. Thank you, Ford. Second, William Bill Smith made a grant recommendation payable over 20 years from his endowed donor advised fund at the Community Foundation to support the operations of FDF. Without that seven-figure grant support, there would be insufficient operating support for FDF, and the administration of the grand bargain would not have been possible. Thank you, Bill. Individuals and businesses may direct gifts in support of the grand bargain. In the end, all forms of philanthropic giving, endowment, donor advised funds, and direct gifts contributed to the funding of it. Historically, the United States has been known as a country where its citizens care for one another by their gifts of time, talent, and treasure. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about our commitment to civic institutions and democracy in America. As such, we must concern ourselves with any attempt by policymakers to judge certain types of philanthropy as good or bad. We should maintain tax and other laws that promote all philanthropy, whether it is endowed or for current needs, whether it's for a particular charitable cause or another. We are all enriched from the generosity of those who choose to give their treasures to the benefit of others, whether that generosity manifests itself in direct giving, donor advised funds, or endowment. All philanthropy matters. Safe spaces. One of the unique aspects of the discussions and negotiations of the grand bargain within the context of philanthropy was that they were all done under the auspices of a court-ordered confidentiality agreement. Now, I will tell you that there are many good stories I would enjoy to tell you, but I can't because of that order. And I would also tell you that I am very glad for that confidentiality order so others can't tell you stories about me. But in all seriousness, the confidentiality order had a very positive effect in that the parties could have honest, frank, and candid conversation on the issues without the fear of having their views played out in tweets and news headlines. Good people can say things unartfully or insensitively at times. This can lead to misunderstandings, to be used politically against the well-intentioned. The confidentiality order gave protection from those potential embarrassments, which allowed for the free flow of ideas and the resolution of the bankruptcy. For the foundation funders, this level of trust had been established among them previously. All the foundation funders, or combinations of them, had been involved for decades in a variety of joint philanthropic projects. Examples that involve the Community Foundation have included our Van Dusen Challenge, Touch the Future, and increasing regional philanthropy programs, each in an effort to build permanent community endowment through training, public outreach, and direct and planned gifts. Other joint programs include the Greenways Initiative in Southeast Michigan that has vastly increased the amount of trails and bike paths in our community. The New Economy Initiative that is now transforming the Southeast Michigan economy into an innovation-based and inclusive economy. and the Detroit Early Childhood Initiative that is supporting Head Start innovations. Because of this history of working collectively on matters of significant import, the foundation funders had already learned to trust one another and had developed shared expectations of how to respect one another in having serious conversations. These relationships were critical to the success behind the discussions of the Grand Bargain. Now, I would make a distinction about the type of safe space I am suggesting. This is not the safe space often discussed on campuses that relies on political correctness, though I note that we should always strive to respect the experience and feelings of others. But as I mentioned earlier, well-intentioned people will misspeak from time to time. Rather, what I am suggesting is a safe space where all are welcome, regardless of political view, race, ethnicity, religion, or gender identity, and where everyone is allowed the opportunity to have frank, well-intended, respectful dialogue without the fear of intellectual persecution for having a difference of voice or for speaking unartfully. It is only through sustained, intelligent, honest dialogue that we can address serious social issues. To have that dialogue, we must allow others to feel safe and respected when they share their thoughts with us. Safe places matter. Courage and leadership. It is easy to follow routines. They are predictable, familiar, and easy. Associating with those we think like we do, act like we do, or look like we do is comfortable. Like water, we follow the path of least resistance and do not want to swim against the tide. Growth and progress, personally, institutionally, and societally, requires that we break out of our routines. They require us to test assumptions and to try new things, often at the expense of our comfort and the comfort of those around us who have come to expect a pattern of behavior and action by us. Being comfortable in the uncomfortable means to have courage. It requires the ability to face the critique and observation of others and the opinions of naysayers who do not believe in your choice of action. It requires you to evaluate the validity of those contrary views against your own so that you have confidence that the path you have chosen is the correct one. Once the path toward the Grand Bargain was chosen, the leaders of all the parties involved had to have the courage to lead their constituencies toward that shared goal. Those leaders were many, including union leaders addressing their members about pension benefit cuts, to government officials securing financial support and the agreements necessary to fund the Grand Bargain, the DIA leadership for assuming new fundraising commitments, for lawyers rising to the challenge of being counselors and not simply attorneys, and foundation funder presidents and board members finding that the Grand Bargain was in furtherance of the missions of their foundations and worthy of extraordinary grant commitments. That leadership trickled down to every level of staff and others who had to execute the shared vision of where and how the Grand Bargain would go, often assuring others at, below, or above their position that the decision to proceed was the correct one. Courage was everywhere, as everyone had to trust in a path and a direction on which no one had ever traveled. Courage and leadership matters. Balance. Finding balance among all of the competing interests and pressures faced in life and in making social change matters. An example of finding balance was the decision of the foundation funders to provide grant support to be used solely for the pensions while at the same time remaining uninvolved in pension benefit negotiations. To do otherwise would have likely created an unhealthy imbalance between the proper role of government and philanthropy. The respect for proper balance in our roles often requires walking a tightrope stretched between what is appropriate to do and what is not, when to act and when to wait. I would assert that the participation of the foundation funders in the Grand Bargain found that balance. Others may disagree. I can only tell you from my vantage point, we were constantly aware that we needed to find the proper balance in our actions. Balance mattered. Many years ago, I was named a fellow in the Michigan Political Leadership Program at Michigan State University. This is a nonpartisan program designed for those that aspire to be involved in public policy either as an elected official, advocate, or volunteer. The program was very challenging for me personally as it forced me to evaluate my way of thinking about the approaching matters of public policy. Halfway through the program, I was ready to quit. But with the encouragement of my wife, I stayed enrolled and ended up being asked to be one of the graduation speakers. The central theme of my comments at that graduation was that while we all come together to address a specific question of interest or public policy with our own expectations, experiences, and assumptions, we must first remember that we came together. We chose to be there to discuss the topic at hand as we all cared about that topic. How we put aside our differences to make positive change with regard to the topic is predicated on our first finding a commonality of the heart. The participants of the Grand Bargain found a commonality of the heart in the mutual desire to help save our city. Some who participated wanted to assure that the pensioners would not be forced into poverty through unconscionable pension cuts. Others wanted to assure the storied and irreplaceable art of the DIA would be protected as a cultural and educational resource vital to the future revitalization of the region. Many, and I would personally count myself among this group, were motivated by that broader concern that all the residents of the city of Detroit, the residents of the region and Michigan, would be irreparably harmed if the bankruptcy proceeding did not come to an expedited conclusion. Everyone found in the end that the survival of the city was a common goal, as without it, any other philanthropic mission that they would want to accomplish would never be possible. What mattered was that all who participated saw how the motivation and goals of the other parties resonated and was intertwined with their own. Commonality of the heart matters. So, in conclusion, the Grand Bargain and the Foundation for Detroit's Future will remain an interesting case study of the role of community philanthropy affecting social change for decades to come. I am optimistic that the City of Detroit has begun its revitalization and renewal because of the extraordinary effort, commitment, courage, and sacrifice of all involved. The Grand Bargain offers itself not as a financial model to be emulated in addressing municipal bankruptcies or other fiscal or social challenges. The facts and circumstances present in the bankruptcy were unique to that community and will not be the same in others. It is not a model of foundations bailing out government. Rather, the Grand Bargain is a model for philanthropic and civic behavior. It illustrates the importance in affecting social change of place, philanthropy, safe spaces, courage and leadership, balance, and commonality of the heart. I trust that the lessons that I have learned from the Grand Bargain and shared here will have a positive influence on your future successes. May each of you find a commonality of heart amongst your family, friends, colleagues, and neighbors that will lead to a brighter future for the communities that each of you call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Got time for a few questions. If you have any questions about the Grand Bargain, please let me know. Yes, so we have one right here.
Hi, my name is Xochitl Delgado Solorzano. I'm a second-year student. And thinking back to when this was happening, all I remember hearing on the news was about the museum and the Art Institute. Was that a communication strategy, not bringing up the other stuff to it, or was it just that's what was being covered?
Sorry, I like to wander. No, that was not our communication strategy. That just seemed to be what everybody wanted to talk about. I don't know if that's art, if it's just sexy, that that's attractive, that we're talking about this beautiful. And if you've ever been to the DIA, it is world class. You should come and see it. Okay. I think that was the thing that people just couldn't get their head around, that we were going to sell off this precious resource to solve a bankruptcy. The flip of it would be people saying, but you're going to let pensioners starve if you don't. So it became this sort of central focal point. But like I said, and I will serve till the day I die, though that was important, the pensions were important, saving the city was important. That was where we were all going. So internally, I think that a lot of us were focusing on that bigger, broader thing.
Any other questions? Robin, let me just say it's been a pleasure having you with us this week. Just so you'll know, we've enjoyed your company. We've canceled your plane ticket. So you're here, you don't know that, but you're here longer than you thought you were. But we thank you for sharing your time and your talent and your experience with us, not only for our students, but our faculty and staff in our community. And so we're grateful that you could be here.
And I just want to take one moment to say thanks. A little scholarly, liberty here. I want to also thank you all of you and all of you on watching at home for honoring me by coming to and actually listening to this presentation, and for your commitment and to your communities and to community philanthropy. I also want to acknowledge that over this last week that it's been great to see the fine things that are being done by the students here and the graduates of the Clinton School for Public Service. I was just amazed at the projects you guys are undertaking and for the futures that you're envisioning for yourselves and your communities. It was inspiring for me. I also want to thank all the professors here for your commitment to educating this next generation of leaders. Each of you is an example to those aspiring students who look to you to knowledge and guidance, so thank you for making that commitment. And to the amazing staff, all of them have made me feel welcome and have contributed to my wonderful week, especially my suite mates, Steve, Leandra, Hunter, Abby, and Kevin. We've been having some fun. It's been a blast. Thank you very, very much. It's probably going to get a little quieter next week. Thank you to the Dean and to Associate Dean Hoffpower for your vision and leadership for the Clinton School for Public Service. Thank you very much. And to Dr. Williams, Director of the Center of Community Philanthropy, a person of great drive and passion, who I've enjoyed getting to know. Thank you for inviting me to be here. And lastly, thank you especially to my wife, my family, my friends and colleagues. I realize that nothing I will ever do or ever accomplish is not because of them. I will lean on them constantly for their wisdom and their support, and the reason I'm here is because of them. So I want to make sure I acknowledge them. So thank you all.